Peter Byck has been on a journey to document those who are managing in such a way that they sequester more carbon. You've maybe seen his work in things like the Carbon Cowboys. In his most recent project, Roots So Deep You Can See the Devil Down There, he's talking to farmers on two different sides of the fence, one conventional, one regenerative, and he's talking to them about how their management is making the difference in their land.
Because so many farmers don't know that soil health is an option. And it's not a blame or shame thing whatsoever. It's just not talked about. It's like in our film, when one of our farmers spends a morning with Alan, he's like, "Thank you. I didn't know any of this. It makes perfect sense. No one's ever taken the time to tell me this stuff. About how hot the soil gets if there's not a plant on it. It makes sense when you hear it, but you just don't. It's just not in your consciousness unless you hear it, right? And certainly for me, who I'm not a farmer, I had to learn all this stuff from scratch, right?
At one point, I asked him what was the most convincing set of facts that helped people see the true difference that regenerative management was making on their neighbor's ranch.
I think what surprised me and what was a powerful indicator for the conventional farmers was birds. Like the conventional farmers finding out how little or no birds were on their land when so many birds were across the fence. It's not like it was across the town or next state over, next county over. It was across the fence with the same soil type on both sides of the fence. That was a requirement of our research. And that really was an eye-opener for a lot of the farmers. Water infiltration was another very important factor when they find out that you're getting so much less water into your soil than your neighbor, and the only difference is how you're managing your animals. You understand how important water is. Every farmer and rancher knows how important water is.
We're going to discuss all that and more on this episode 456 of the Working Cows podcast, brought to you by Ranch Right, Remedy Animal Solutions.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
People get ready, then a change is coming your way. Better be waking up early, than a dead man running late.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows podcast, recorded exclusively in the Understanding Ag studios. Very excited to be joined today by Peter Byck. Peter Byck is a documentary filmmaker, has done some great work with the series Carbon Cowboys, featuring people from Canada to Texas and all points in between and east and west, and the work that they're doing to regenerate landscapes using livestock. And he came to this as a learner, not as a farmer or rancher himself, and has been really on this quest to feature the work of these ladies and gentlemen. And now with his new project, Roots So Deep You Can See the Devil Down There, he's taking farmers and ranchers that are on properties that are across the fence from each other with the same soil types, and they are comparing the effects of their management. How much water can they infiltrate? How many birds do they have? All these things. And so we're going to talk to him today about those things that they've been seeing. What have they been finding? What have they been discovering? What have they been information they've been able to capture and show these people. So very excited to share with you some of what he's learned through this process, and we'll do that right after a word from our sponsor today, Remedy Animal Solutions. Are you plagued with respiratory infections, pink eye, too many open cattle, lice, high vet and drug bills? Let Remedy Animal Solutions help you transition to a drug and vax-free system with their protocols. Prevention is way better than medicating. Let them show you how to be more effective, spend less, and do less work doctoring using their effective formulas sprayed on salt for prevention or intranasally for treatment, never needing a drug or needle. Consumer demand for clean meat is high. Remedy Animal Solutions can give you customized advice by calling them to get your concerns and challenges resolved. Their natural and organically qualified products have no holdback time or culls when treated. For listeners of the Working Cows podcast, you can get $200 off your complete first aid kit for quick treatment options on the spot. Consider listening to both of our previous episodes with Ellen Bench of Remedy Animal Solutions on the Working Cows podcast to get more information about how to integrate these options into your operation. Peter, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows podcast.
Thank you, Clay. Really, really good to be here.
Yeah, I've appreciated your work for a long time, back
Thank
to
you.
the Carbon Cowboys and all that. And so got a chance to see the Roots So Deep. You Can See the Devil Down There documentary, and appreciate the approach that you took there of kind of comparing conventional farms with farms that practice AMP grazing.
Yep.
I've been partnered with Understanding Ag for quite a while now, so people should be fairly familiar with that. But adaptive multi-paddock grazing, I guess, for the uninitiated.
Are you? I told you I was going to ask questions. Are you Are you one of the teachers for Understand?
No, they just are. They're the studio sponsor for the podcast. So,
oh, sweet. Okay, cool.
So I've probably done at this point close to 50 interviews with their instructors, their consultants. So, yep.
Yes, we had Burke on a couple of times lately.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
well done.
Yeah, he's a wealth of knowledge. So
there is.
But yeah, I kind of where I wanted to start today is one of the hardest things to me, it seems, about what you did is just taking a systems approach to a documentary. Like, where do you start? How do you know what systems need to be measured? How do you know who to talk to as far as who's the person to do the measuring? All those kinds of things. How do you approach that?
Yeah, well, you're talking about a big team. It ain't me. I'm part of the team, but it's a big team. And so, I became really interested in natural, nature-based solutions to climate change. That was why I came into this. And I know a lot of the farmers I work with, they're not concerned with climate change, but the good stuff they're doing fixes what I'm worried about. And we can get into what I call the big tent, the soil health big tent. So many ways to get in. So I started meeting scientists who were focused on this in 2012. Alan Williams, one of the first ones. And then a guy named Steve Applebaum, who introduced me to Richard Teague, and then Teague introduced me to Jason Roundtree. And then, I got to meet Christine Jones, who was out of Australia. And all throughout 2013, I was meeting all these scientists. I got to meet David Johnson, these 1-hour conversations. David Johnson was a 2-hour conversation. And
that's Johnson Sioux bioreactors.
Exactly. With Hui Chen, his wife. And they all were very interested in adaptive regenerative grazing as a solution to what they were looking at, the microbes or the animals or the ecology, but they didn't quite know each other too much. A couple of them knew each other, but not quite. So it was really interesting. Through serendipity, which is a through line for my life, I'm smart and I'm just letting things flow. It's better. And so that whole year I was just letting things flow, meeting this scientist, meeting that one. And then I heard about this grant that combined human and natural systems. And I'm like, oh, this feels like what we're talking about. Humans, nature, working together. So I emailed all of those scientists that I'd just spoken to briefly. They didn't know who I was. I hadn't made any of the Carbon Cowboys films yet. I was filming the first one that year with Alan and Gabe Brown and Neil Dennis, Alan Williams. And they all emailed me back. Within 2 hours, they had all emailed back. We talk about this at the beginning of Roots So Deep. And I came home and I said to my wife, I said, Krishna, something just happened. Something just happened. And so it was that entire group of scientists at ASU. I'm at Arizona State University. I was new here, got a little grant, brought everyone out in January of 2014. It was that group of scientists that decided what would be the great things to study. Soil, carbon and nitrogen, water infiltration, plant diversity, the nutrient density of the plants, the ground cover, the animal well-being, the farmer well-being, greenhouse gas cycling, although at the time we didn't know how we were going to do that yet. The bugs, the birds, all those things, those were the elements that I was taught by them. And I was just looking at carbon. Just tell me about carbon. And then I was taught, well, if you look at carbon dioxide, you better look at methane. And if you look at methane, you better look at nitrous oxide. So you have to look at all of it. They taught me systems thinking, right? And so the documentary is about them teaching me. and then us bringing that out to the farms. And it was Rebecca Riles, who was on our team at the beginning. She then pulled away and she's doing amazing work. She couldn't stay with our team. But she was the one who really planted in our minds side-by-side tests across the fence. And she was thinking that those side-by-side tests that we could do early could help us raise money for a bigger project. And it took us so long to raise money for the project, that became the project. And so that conventional on one side, adaptive on the other, of grazing, and let's measure everything the same. That was the goal. And that's what it came to be that. And it took us a long time to raise the money. It took us from that meeting to out in the field, it was 4.5 years. And some of the team members, like Steve Applebaum, had a company called Applied Ecological Systems, I think, Services Systems, AES. And he let his company put a lot of resources into this project, even though it wasn't making any money yet. So he really put a lot in when we didn't have those funds. And then we actually raised $500,000 from Shell Oil to sort of test out a lot of these details up in Alberta. And we did 4 farm pairs. You know, we didn't get all the conventional farmers to give us data. We missed one. The other ones did. So it was learning, right? What did we do wrong to not get that farmer on board? Like, where did we misstep, right? But the data came in. It was showing differences, and then we used that as the template for what we did in the Southeast U.S. So then the filming just became filming everything. So we have so much footage, and it took a really brilliant editor named Ben Daughtry to really go through the footage and see the story. I couldn't see it because I was so busy working with the scientists, raising the money, filming everything with Chris Smith, a camera guy, was a former student, and then a couple other camera folks for the next years, Nick Serpa and Kenzie Greer. And so I was busy, and he had the time, took the time. It took him about 2 months to make a decision, swimming through the footage, if he thought there was a story here. And he was the 4th editor. We were kind of plowing through editors on this project because it was so big, it was so untenable. And he saw it, and luckily he kept on. So he worked for about 1.5 years and just found the story of all that stuff.
Yeah. I've been getting asked to do more speaking recently, and that's one of the ideas I have for speaking is to take clips from the Working Cows podcast and play them live on stage while I'm speaking. But like, just the thought of trying to figure out, just going through and finding those clips that would be fitting for a certain moment in a talk is like totally overwhelming. Oh
yeah, and I'm like 474, right? I mean,
yeah,
I've done a lot of them. Yeah. Years and years. I mean, kudos to you, man. That's I mean, the knowledge that you've built in your podcast is vast, right? And obviously AI could help, but AI ain't perfect yet.
Yeah.
I'm seeing some transcripts that are not the English that was said during the meeting. A good word becomes a naughty word, and I'm like, that's not what they said.
For sure. And I feel the same as you, though, too. Like, I'm too close to this to know what it is. You need that third eye. And honestly, like I was telling my wife the other day, I'm pretty sure Sean Freeland, who's a great rancher just east of Rapid City, South Dakota, and a guy that needs to be on the podcast soon. But I said, I'm pretty sure he's learned more from my podcast than I have, just because I sit there and listen to him talk. And it's just like, I hear all these things, and I'm sure he heard them other places too, or other places first. But it's like, I do struggle trying, like, when people ask me, what is your favorite moment or what have you learned? It's like, man, I don't even know how this has changed me just because I'm so close to it,
Got to be some that ring for you. There's got to be some that ring. Yeah. And that's where I would recommend, that's where you start pulling your clips. Those ones that really, really ring for you would be the ones that would ring for the audience. So if you have those moments that you remember, find them. Yeah. You don't need 5 or 6 or 7 for a public speaking gig anyway. Right. You might be further along that road than you think. You don't have to start from scratch. You have what you remember as really good moments. And you're right. It's like, if you remember them, they're good.
Right. Yeah. And Steve Kenyon was one of the Canadian farmers. Am I right? Yep. Was he part of the side-by-side?
God, that name sounds familiar, but I don't think so.
Okay. Maybe it's a different study, but right. He's the one that kind of turned me on to this line of thought, this line of questioning that I want to go on right now. Okay. And that is that it seems that the visual benefits of amp grazing are easier to see than they are to measure scientifically. Would you agree with that?
It is really easy to see the benefits, to hear the benefits, to actually feel the benefits with your feet. You see the animals, you see the wildlife coming. There's a lot of indicators. Throw some water on the ground and see it soak in, things like that. The difficulty for measuring isn't the difficulty, it's the difficulty of fundraising. It's not the measurement itself that's difficult, it's the finding the funds to measure.
Hmm.
And now the big challenge is, how do we keep making measurement and verification, measuring it and then having it verified, cheaper and more accurate, cheaper and more accurate. And so what we're thinking about right now. But not to diminish the scientists' expertise, but being out in the field, there is a lot of work. There is a lot of work, especially the soil cores. It takes a lot of time, a lot of work to go a meter deep with a 2-inch thing, and you got the hydraulic drill. And if the ground's hard, then that machine lost the welds to keep it steady. Those welds broke twice on conventional operations. And so there's work. We did it in hot summer, late spring, summer in the Southeast U.S. So that's work. There's work. And then, of course, what Sam Mosier did at Colorado State, taking those 550 samples and breaking them down and doing all that work, that's work. But I wonder if she would say it was hard or just a lot of work. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And so yeah, I would slightly differ with what would you say Steve Kenyon was saying?
Well, no, it's just my assessment of it is probably more where I'm going with it. That it
Okay.
is hard to measure those things scientifically, and I understand what you're saying, that it's more about funding and capturing attention maybe of scientists to get them to focus on this
And time and things like that. Yep, a whole lot of reasons there.
Do you think that there's, I think towards the end of the documentary, Alan Williams makes a statement that we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 5% adoption of this style of grazing, but it's growing, and it has grown a lot over the last 4 years at that time. Do you think that is facilitating a change in some of these things, from funding science to scientific attention to, are we seeing some of those things starting to move in a big way, or is it still early?
I think that when you talk to Alan and Gabe, they say that what's happening now is so much better and easier than what was happening even 5 or 10 years ago, with the momentum going towards regenerative agriculture. I just trust them and take their word for that. I'm not out enough to know that, but they are. They absolutely are. I think that we still have a long way to go. I think that the folks who are doing regenerative agriculture right now, regenerative grazing that we study, I think there's some amazing practitioners, amazing folks, but I think generally we're just scratching the surface of what this could be. So I think there's a lot to learn, a whole lot of opportunity in front of us, a whole lot of regenerating soils, getting farmers out of debt, hopefully rebuilding rural communities that have been dried up because of the way the economics of the industrial agricultural system just sort of sucks the money out to the big cities and doesn't replenish. So I think I don't know anyone who's like resting right now who's working on this stuff, but I think that the indicators are good, that enough people are talking about it. I can say from my experience, when we started talking to funders and companies back in 2013, 2014 about this, we had to start from scratch every conversation, sometimes like beyond below scratch. We had to like really do a lot of educating of the basics. That's pretty much gone now. So that's a huge difference in my world. That's what I see, is like folks know about this now. They might think it's great, they might think it's bull, but they know about it. And so for me, the more science we do right now, the more measurement we do right now, is just going to be good. So it tells us what the truth is, right? We need to find out, is this a benefit? Certainly in our research, it's a huge benefit. So I can say very clearly now, in the Southeast U.S., this is making the world better. The longer those animals are on the planet, the way they're being managed, the world is better. The air is cleaner. The earth would be cooler if enough farmers did this. The water cycling would be better. The wildlife would have more places to be. The grassland birds would be having much more land to nest and breed on. All of our indicators were very strong. And so now we can say that, right? It's not just someone walking on a field. We can say it, prove it, show the peer-reviewed papers, boom. And so we're not stopping on that, but all of our funding has been sort of in the philanthropic world, and now we're like, how do we scale this up? How do we scale this up in a major, major way? So that's now that the film's finished and the science is just about finished. It takes scientists a long time sometimes. What's next, right? What's next? And that's what we as a team are looking at right now.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Ranch Right. There's nothing artificial about the intelligence of the team at Ranch Right. They're a group of super crunchers, accountants, HR advisors, and succession specialists with the knowledge and desire to provide you with actionable financials so you can build a profitable business that creates generational wealth. Having a team of people that live and breathe these topics beats the pants off taking a shot in the dark with the latest Silicon Valley large language model. Don't assume AI got it right. Enlist Ranch Right today so you can know that you have all the information you need to make the best decision for the future of your ranch. Head on over to ranchrightllc.com today to take advantage of their real world experience so you can have clarity and confidence in the future of your business. No robots were harmed in the making of this advertisement. What was some of the corporate reaction? Some of the funders, Shell, McDonald's was mentioned in the documentary. What was some of the corporate reaction to the film, or have you?
I think with us, our corporate relationships were really like 1, 2, or 3 people. I think that companies, so we actually got them to provide funding. That was a big deal. So Shell provided funding for like the pre-research, and then they funded some scientists that did research on our farm pear in Woodville, Mississippi. So they were tangentially involved in this big project that's in Roots So Deep. McDonald's was our biggest funder. They gave us a $4.5 million grant. We used $3,750,000 of that in the Southeast, which we matched and more. So the Southeast cost about $10 million, which includes the film, includes all the research. And then we raised another $3.1 million for our work up in North and South Dakota that's happening right now. And at last, $750,000 from McDonald's is there. And if anyone wants to see where every dollar is, where we got it, and it's on our website, you can go to rootsodeep.org, go to research, you'll see all of our published papers, and then at the bottom of that drop down, you'll see the funding stream. We haven't really had in my mind, like the sort of final, like, let's screen it for McDonald's, because all the people that we dealt with have moved on, either retired or have moved on to other stuff. Those people have seen the film and like it quite a bit. With the new folks at McDonald's that are there now, maybe somewhere there, but they've moved up, they want to see all the finished science before they can really make a decision, which I understand. And so our greenhouse gas data has been the one that's been unfinished. It's just getting finished now, and the papers are being written now. So I think for a company to make statements, to make claims, they got to have rock solid peer-reviewed data. So that last bit of peer review is not finished yet.
Is there competing science out there that are doing studies that would try to push back on this, or try to say, hey, no, conventional management, conventional farming, tillage, all that stuff is, hey, it's not really that bad, or no, we're not actually creating desert windstorms in 30+ inch rainfall environments? Are they going out there and trying to push back on that?
2 very different events you just mentioned are real. Those are happening. We're in dust storms and then we're having 30 inches of rain in a very short amount of time. And the folks who are doing regenerative agriculture, when they get those big droughts, they're still producing because they've done a great job of getting their soil healthy, which holds on to moisture. And they have more plants growing, which actually gets more dew, like physically more dew in that system, no matter if it's raining or not. It's amazing. I mean, not ruined, but we had a lot of wet pants walking around those fields, but we did swamp a few boots. The dew was so heavy duty. But then when you get those big, big giant rainstorms and these farmers are working the next day, it's soaked up the rain. And so they're being good neighbors, right? They're letting that water go back into the aquifers, back into the water tables. That's as good a neighbor as you can be, right? And so with science that's out there right now, the bulk of the science that I'm aware of only measures 30 centimeters in soil studies. Why? Because you can do that by hand. It's cheap. It's easy. We're measuring a meter. Other folks are now measuring 2 meters, 3 feet, and 3 inches, right?
Mm.
It's a lot harder. You need different equipment. It's a whole different ballgame. We see a lot of carbon accrual below 30 centimeters down to a meter. We see a lot of it. And so all of those papers that say that the soils can't bring down this much carbon, all of them, unless they went down a meter, are just looking at part of the story, right? It's like looking through, paper towel core. And so that's something to keep in mind. There is a group that's calling what they're studying AMP grazing, but it's not. AMP grazing is very much about adaptive. It's about each paddock is a different size throughout the year, much less year to year. And they have set size paddocks for a 10, 12-year study. And that's just not adaptive multi-paddock grazing, but they're calling it that. So that gets confusing. I haven't seen a study that's truly studying adaptive multi-paddock grazing yet. Other than our work, there's some work that's being done in Oxford, England. FAI is the group, and they've got data. It's just getting that data published would be the next step. There's other groups that have reached out to us and reached out to other teams. There's a study up in Canada, and they had some interesting sort of agreements and disagreements with some of our science teams. I want to see it. I want to see it out there. And so it's like, why? Why isn't anyone else really studying this type of grazing? And I don't have an answer for that because it's phenomenal. The benefits to the farmer alone are worth the price of admission, much less to the ecosystem, to the animals, to the animal that to the feed that we take in if we eat those animals, and the nutrient density and all the stuff that benefits beyond the farm, just for the farmer alone. And I've said this a lot. I'd rather farmers be making a good living and not cutting corners. They're producing our food.
Yeah,
Are you
for
a
sure.
farmer?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I
Yeah.
am. Yep.
So where do you farm?
Western South Dakota, north of
Okay.
Rapid City, if you know South Dakota at all. So
Yeah.
Yep.
And how's it going for you?
Well, this has been a great year, and we've been here 6 years. Yeah, 6 years in October is when we moved into this place, and it had been a hayfield, so industrial scale nutrient exportation, as I call it.
Yep.
And so it's taken some time to get to turn the corner, and we've been in a drought for most of the years we've been here. So
That's right. Yeah.
Right. So this has been a good year, and we're seeing more diversity this year than we've ever seen, and more production, and better recoveries in places where we've grazed. That most of the years we've been here, we haven't seen recovery, really.
Okay.
I mean, we've grazed. We only have been in a spot one time per year, or longer, but we just haven't seen the recovery. And this year we're seeing it. We're seeing places where we even 30 days ago, there's no. I mean, you can see the bite marks, but they've grown out, and so that's just something new for us to see. But this is closer to what we would expect for a year. Normal, as Brian Alexander says, is just a setting on a dryer. So not a normal year, but we this is kind of what this country should get, if you're going by historic averages. And so it's kind of fun to see.
How much rain are you getting this year then that you're happy with?
Yeah, 12 and a half, close to 13 inches since the middle of April. And so we're 15-inch environment, so some of that's going to come in snow. So we're probably even maybe a little above average this year.
Right. But last year, what were you at, 5 or 6 inches?
Yeah, something like that.
And so that's going to slow every process down.
Right.
But you stayed, are you doing AMP grazing or something?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And if you weren't seeing regeneration in that next year, did you think about quitting and going back?
No. I believe in the process. It was a little discouraging not to see changes, for sure. I talked to Alan and Gabe frequently, and, they're telling me in 4 or 5 years, you should start to see that hockey stick improvement. And I'm like, well, I'm sure that's true, but we're less than half of annual rainfall in that time period, really is what we've had since we've been here. And so, but, it's just been a good year, thank God, and we're trying to make the most of it, and trying to impact more. Actually, we're taking more grass this year than we ever have in the places where we are, but we're also going to use less of the ranch this year than we have in other years. And so our goal would be to use 1/3 this year in the growing season, 1/3 in the dormant season, and then start on the third that we didn't touch next year at the start of the growing season.
And how
So-
much land are you ranching?
Yeah, we're in a half section, so 320 acres, which I always tell people in my neighborhood that'll run 9 cows for a year, 9 cow calf pairs for a year. You know, half section in Mississippi and Alabama sounds like a lot, but in Western South Dakota, and you're in Arizona, you know some of that country's like 1 section per cow calf pair.
Right. Now, are you running more animals than your neighbors at this point, or are you sort of at the county average right now?
Yeah, we've always kind of pushed the top limit of what they would do, but we've always known that our land was degraded, right? And I went to the Jim Garish grazing school, you know, and he harps on that. If your land is degraded, you can't take 50%, you can't take 60, 70%. You need to take 20%, 10% if it's degraded, you know, leave behind 90%. And so that's kind of what we've been doing, is leaving way more than we need to. So we have never really pushed our stocking rate to what it could be, but that's because we're trying to waste grass so that we get that ground cover. You know, that was one of the things I appreciated in the documentary. It said, you said, the name of the game is ground cover, and all the grazing gurus I've talked to over the years, they would agree with that. You know, that if you have to do, the last thing you should sacrifice is ground cover. The last thing that you should be willing to damage or harm is ground cover. And so that's what we're trying to do. I mean, there was places you could probably throw a cowboy hat down and not touch a plant on this ranch when we got here, just bare ground. And we're starting to see those close up. And honestly, we just had a hailstorm that totally torched our garden here 2 weeks ago, but it laid down more ground cover than I've seen on. So it's like, you win some, you lose some, but
and so this podcast, I would imagine you're using this as your PhD. I mean, you're just researching. Yeah.
That's 100% what this podcast has been the whole time, has been just me satisfying my curiosity, asking the next dumb question that I'm sure 90% of the people who are listening smack their forehead and say, how does he not know this yet? But, I'm just trying to learn, and I'm learning on the job, literally, I've got 2 or 3 jobs, side hustles, whatever they are, and so it's just kind of, the grazing is one part of it. The podcast is one part of it. I pastor a church here right in our neighborhood, and that's a part of it, but it's all fits together to make things work around here.
So when you're pastoring your church, do you talk about nature and farming and stewardship? Do you gently care for the planet? Do you talk about those themes?
Yeah, I'm not as heavy-handed about it. I try to let the text of Scripture drive where I go with my sermons, and I tend to preach verse by verse through books of the Bible, and so I'll address it when it comes up, But I think I've often said that probably the last thing that a bunch of people who've been doing it for generations want to hear from a guy who just moved to the neighborhood is how they should be farming and ranching.
Right. That's a big difference. Yeah, that's a thing.
Right. And I mean, we are, we're not the Southeast, we're not 8 generations in here, but we are 4 or 5 generations in a lot of these places. And so, I want to learn from them, because they made it through the dirty 30s. They made it through the 80s farm crisis. They made it through the Atlas blizzard that killed 90% of the cows within 100 miles of where I sit right now, so.
Blizzard that was in the last 5 years?
This one happened in 2013. And I don't know if it was 90% of what was within 100 miles of here, but there was dead cattle everywhere. And there were ranches that lost 90%. There were, I always put it in perspective for people when I say, I was talking to one of the guys that is a member of the church, and he said, yeah, we're pretty blessed. We only lost 25% of our herd in that storm. So when one guy can say he feels blessed because he only lost 25% of his herd in one storm, on one day, 25% of your cows are wiped out, and you feel blessed compared to the people who lost 75%, 90%, it's a devastating storm. I actually attempted to make an audio documentary of it on the 10-year anniversary of it when I was doing this podcast, and it was difficult to find people who were willing to talk about it 10 years later. They just don't want to talk about it. And so, yeah, that's how much of a devastating event that was. And so I really try to be pretty careful about those kinds of things. I'll answer questions when I'm asked directly, and I've had people from the church call me and ask me to come and basically consult, with them because they lost 20-30% of their ranch. The lease went another direction and they weren't able to keep it. And so, I've had people ask me to come do those kinds of things, and I'm willing to do that. But yeah, at the end of the day, I'll address stewardship and, those kinds of things. We've been entrusted with resources. We want to leave it better than we found it. But really, I would say, a lot of my neighbors are good managers. I was just telling my wife this today. I said, a lot of our neighbors are good managers. They're maybe $10,000 worth of fence from being world-class managers. Like, they've got the water. A lot of them have the water, honestly. Like, there's a place where I go brand regularly in the spring. I think some of those pastures have 5, 6, 8 water points in them. And if you just fenced them out, made those into cell centers, and you go from having one pasture with 5 water tanks to 20 pastures, and they're I think I oftentimes ride through those places, and they've been generations, 3, 4 generations of people who have been kind of managing that way. I ride through them in the spring, and I'm envious of the grass that they have, because I'm riding through my hayfield that I'm trying to regenerate.
Right.
I'm like, wow, this looks good, but at the same time,
that they could push it so much further if they chose. And it's not a criticism of what they're doing. It's just, we know some more information now.
Right. Well, and like the documentary points out, right? I mean, it's even conventionally managed is 0.8 tons per hectare of a sink, right? Not to steal the thunder of the documentary, but
it's still a sink.
It's still a sink, but it's 4 times better on the amp side.
And you can raise 2 or 3 times more animals.
Right.
And so, I was talking to one conventional farmer in our film. He's like, if I could double my carrying capacity that it is right now, I could quit my day job. But if he quits his day job, he loses his health insurance. And so that's a big piece of the puzzle for a lot of the farmers I know. The day jobs are as much health insurance as they are anything else.
Yeah.
Which is a statement on what our country values. But that particular farm, that's the conventional farm in Tennessee. I mean, when Alan visited with them, and you see that in episode 4, I mean, he was just blown away by the gorgeousness of their land. They're in great shape. They're doing a great job. Man, they could just push that thing. They could just push it and have so much more productivity.
Was that the Spanglers?
Yeah.
And so they could cut out the feed, because part of the reason their cows look so good is because they're feeding them, right? They could cut out the feed, and then you also, but they could cut out the nitrogen that they're adding. I mean, they've got to spray the nitrogen to keep the pastures looking good. You got to feed the microbes with the nitrogen, and you got to feed the cows, and in a regenerative or adaptive system, you can cut out both of those things and make a better bottom line, and really enable yourself to do that.
I know there's great interest there, and I stay in touch with everybody. It's fun. It's good.
Yeah, that's what was one of my questions. Again, I don't want to give away too much.
We don't want to talk about too much about the ending, right?
But how durable? So among those who were willing to change, how durable has that been?
Very.
Really?
Yeah.
Cool.
Like weathering droughts, wildlife showing back, all the stuff that their neighbors were seeing, they're seeing. It's so consistent. That's what's so amazing to me, is how consistent it is. But I tell you, I think the real key ingredient is continued knowledge sharing. It's not just like someone just goes to a farm visit and then they can do it, right? Some probably can, but like continually sharing knowledge with neighbors, with other folks, so that as the transition's happening, you can ask as many questions as you want, and so that you're basically in a 2-3 year education, knowledge sharing, knowledge building piece. That's when I see like people having real success.
Yeah. I came home early from a Leopold Conservation Award tour at my neighbor's ranch to come and finish preparing for this interview, and then to conduct the interview. Anyways, and that was a few things, kind of struck me being there was, first of all, South Dakota Grassland Coalition. Kudos to them. They're amazing. One of the first grassland coalitions in the nation, and then they spun out the Soil Health Coalition, which was the first soil health coalition in the nation. And they're so active, and we're just so blessed to have them here in this part of the world. But they have their grazing school, which is an amazing program. I have very close friends that were instrumental in making that what it is today. And one of the things that they do as a part of that grazing school is a multi-year mentorship with somebody from the coalition, and so just to make that change, as I said, more durable is just a huge piece of it. And mentorship's a big part of it, and not the least of which is what you were saying. You drink the Kool-Aid, you're a believer, adaptive multi-paddock grazing is the way to go, but you go through 4 years of drought when you're trying to start, it can get pretty discouraging. And so just having those people that can encourage you and say, hey, no, keep going, it'll pay off eventually. That's a big part of it, a big part of success in this, right?
Yeah. And you don't want to just hear something and have you feel like it's blowing smoke or it's not good advice. So, you know best than anyone. And it sounds like you're in a position now, you guys had a little bit more rain this year, that you're like, whoa, this is something just happened, right? Something's just kicking in. And so hopefully now you're going to be building that resilience so that if you get less rain next year, you're still going to be further along than you were a year ago. I hope. I hope that's what you see.
Right.
I'm sure you do too.
Yeah, I was so encouraged. I was talking to one of the guys that has been a partner here at the ranch, just bouncing some ideas off of him at this tour today. And he's like, man, if we get more rain next year than we did this year, or get as much rain next year as we did this year, then you're really going to see that dividends are going to get paid on those investments of leaving grass behind, because this year we're just kind of making a little bit of a comeback from the last few years. And now when you start with a good subsoil moisture content and then you add more to it, you can just really take off, and that'd be a lot of fun to see. So
you're in Southwest South Dakota.
Northwest is where I'm at. Yep.
Northwest.
But yeah.
And so you're not far from North Dakota, I would guess.
Correct.
Who are the ranchers around you that are doing like just amazing work? Who are the ones that are your mentors or heroes and things like that?
Yeah, I mentioned Sean Freeland for sure, Bart Carmichael, Riley Kammerer, another one. All these guys have been current or former board members of the South Dakota Grassland Coalition or the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition. The ranchos at the Leopold tour, that's the Stomperud Ranch. Larry Stomperud was actually a founding board member of the South Dakota Grassland Coalition. Dave Olila has been involved in every grazing coalition, soil health coalition from their earliest days. He's a guy who farms on some of the heaviest clay soils probably in our neighborhood, and is still able, I think he told me one time, able to infiltrate 4 inches of water per hour, which is just way up. I think that's, at least 10x probably what a normal heavy clay soil can infiltrate. And he's a guy who's doing it with sheep. I love to quote him because he told my dad one time, when a drought hits, we sell the horses first, we sell the cows second, and we sell the sheep last. And that's just backwards.
Backwards to conventional?
Oh yeah, 100%. Because the things that give credibility, the things that increase the size of the proverbial belt buckle, is the horses and the cows, right? And we've the other quip that I've said frequently that I appreciate is, I keep the horses out by the road, by the highway for the tourists. I keep the cows by the driveway for the neighbors, and I keep the sheep out back to pay for it all. So I'm running the Working Cows podcast, but the majority of our grazing days this year are going to be taken up by sheep that we own. And that's what we've always done, is we've owned our own sheep, and then we've taken in custom grazing.
Okay.
March and April were so scary. And then last year, we didn't have any fall moisture at all, really. And we depend on that to get us started in the spring. So we had no fall moisture. March and April were open winter, no snow. And so we decided we weren't taking any custom grazers in this year. But whatever it was, we had a pray for rain event, and the heavens opened up, and God was gracious. And I'm not taking credit for anything or whatever, it was his timing. And so, but we've had one of the better years we've had since we've been here. And so, like I said, we're looking at this year as a deposit in the savings account, for the future, that it's going to be better because we aren't using every blade of grass that we have. We're making a deposit into future years.
And with those leaders in your area that you mentioned, how many of their neighbors are listening or curious? Just like in our film,
Mm-hmm.
they didn't even know the neighbors were curious until we showed up and said, "Hey, your neighbor's curious." They didn't even know. Because the new farmer who's doing the adaptive thing, usually it is a first generation, they don't want to tell people in their neck of the woods what to do at all, right? And then, but I found that the folks who were across the fence that have been doing it for a long time were curious, but they just didn't want to pry. They didn't want to get in their neighbor's business, even if they're a friend of them. Are you seeing any of that potential for communication happening in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, I think that a lot of them there'll be people, with their roles in the Grassland Coalition, Soil Health Coalition. They're guys that host tours at their place, and the neighbors will come to those, and they'll kind of kick the tires and take the opportunity. It's like, I imagine it's like the suburbs when there's a home tour. It's like, hey, let's go check out the neighbor's kitchen or whatever. But, it's kind of, so I think there is some curiosity in that, but I don't know what their actual day-to-day curiosity is like.
You mentioned your dad. Were you raised on a ranch yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think about your operation now.
Yeah, he's actually been through the South Dakota Grassland Coalition grazing school. He's bought in. He loves the ideas, But my dad also, again, my dad was first generation. My dad started mom and dad, I always say they're heroes. They started their ranch from nothing in the 80s during the farm crisis. And so they both worked 35 plus years at jobs in town to make that happen. And they got to live their dream of an early retirement to be ranchers full time and chase grandkids, which is what they do. But, they're open. And I think it's because they were first generation. They didn't have the paid for land to subsidize the way that they wanted to live, which is honestly what happens. Did a great job in the documentary of bringing out the fact that farmers and ranchers don't pay themselves, and so it's really hard to tell, are you profitable because you're not paying yourself, and so they didn't have that option. They had to make a land payment. They had to make a cow payment every year. And so they were, I think, open to innovation more than maybe the typical people in their own generation would have been. But yeah, they're doing good work and paying attention to soil health, and have some of these mentors that I've mentioned, some of these guys that I mentioned are places they've been on farm tours, or Dave Olila plants their cover crops for them on their irrigated crop ground. So, I mean, there's some of those connections that they're doing. So yeah.
That's very cool.
When you have this cool model of these side-by-side comparisons, what was the most convincing piece of data, or was it different from farm to farm for those who are conventional? What was the most convincing piece of data for them?
I think what surprised me and what was a powerful indicator for the conventional farmers was birds. Like the conventional farmers finding out how little or no birds were on their land when so many birds were across the fence. It's not like it was across the town or next state over, next county over. It was across the fence with the same soil type on both sides of the fence. That was a requirement of our research. And that really was an eye-opener for a lot of the farmers. Water infiltration was another very important factor when they find out that you're getting so much less water into your soil than your neighbor, and the only difference is how you're managing your animals. You understand how important water is. Every farmer and rancher knows how important water is. And I think that was a really key indicator for open-mindedness to say, hey, maybe, wait a minute. I might want to look at this. Just looking at the health of the animals and looking at how much forage was being produced across the fence. I think that's something they're looking at already. But change is really hard. And it's like what one of our farmers says in episode 4. It's like, you're asking someone to change, and they're going to sort of lose some friends maybe, or they're afraid to lose some friends. And that's a big deal, and having people speak poorly about you behind your back. It takes maybe special is not the right word, but it takes a certain type of person who lets that roll off their back without having any impact on them, you know?
Well, yeah.
Gales
Honestly, I think that that has played a role in some of the way that all of these transitions have happened is because the guys like Alan Savory and Kit Farrow and all of these very early adopters, some of the first generation guys, they had to develop thick skin
mhm,
because of that. And so some of that thick skin probably turned some people off,
right, maybe
to
so.
being willing to entertain it. But then I think you've got to have that second generation and later on generations come in with that approach. I think like we see you take in the documentary where you're not coming in there to tell them, hey, there's a better way to farm. This is how you should be doing it. You're just like, come in there curious. We're going to learn. We want to learn. We want to see what's different, what's the same, and how we can maybe help people chart a better path forward. Right.
Yep, yep, I love curious people. To me, if someone's curious, I'm already, like, getting along, and yeah, and any also, I think another indicator was the economics, if a farmer doesn't have to spend any money on fertilizer and their land's gonna be more productive and they can look across the fence and see it, that's pretty astounding, and that's hard for farmers to, like, believe, and
Yeah.
truly, the fertilizer is coming out of the animals. There's still you still need nitrogen, you still need fertilizer, you still need all that stuff, but it's coming through the animal as opposed to coming out of a bag or
Yeah.
whatever, it's a jug. That to me, once farmers get that information, it gets their attention.
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
I mean, yeah, the bottom line, right? It's the bottom line for a reason. That's why we
yeah,
call it that. And you came to this as a filmmaker, right? I mean, that was your background. You're a filmmaker. The curiosity for you, I think, as you said early on in this interview, was the carbon, and you were curious about that and
yeah,
how farming, ranching impacted that. Is that accurate?
absolutely, yeah, and, like I said, a lot of the farmers that are good friends of mine aren't really focused on climate change solutions. I am, and so I made a film called Carbon Nation. And it was, a film about climate change. We didn't care if you believed in climate change or not. It was just these were good business ideas, just spending less money to get that beer cold, and having clean air and clean water. And I think pretty much everyone I've ever met likes clean air and clean water. And so of all the solutions that we had found in our research was soils. And then when I focused in on soils, it was the way these folks were grazing that seemed to be the biggest, quickest, most profitable way to turn it around. It wasn't a cost. It didn't need a tax. Didn't even need a subsidy, but it would be nice if there was some help, but it doesn't need it. There's a lot of subsidies right now that go against it as opposed to just not being neutral. And so that's when I started like just really focusing in on the grazing piece. And when I met Alan Williams in 2012, my world changed. That conversation I had with him, couple hours, I still have the notes from that
Hmm.
conversation. Everything sort of shifted. And I'm like, yeah, there's something here. And I'd heard about it prior to that conversation. I met this guy named John Wick who was focused on it. He lives in Marin County, California. And I met this guy named Peter Willis down in South Africa. So I was getting indications of it. And we actually even had some of that in our first documentary in Carbon Nation. But I really didn't quite understand it until that conversation with Alan, and then I started really but it was really when I filmed Alan, and I filmed Neil Dennis, and I filmed Gabe Brown for our first short, Soul Carbon Cowboys in 2013. That's when I got it. Or that's when I started understanding.
Yeah. Right.
I'm still trying to understand it,
Yeah.
and hopefully to the day I die.
Dunning Kruger all the way. More
That
I
Dunning
know,
Kruger.
the more I know, the more I realize I don't know.
Cool. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So like
Well,
you've seen the graph, I'm sure. It like I know everything and you're down here and then you learn something, you're like, maybe this is more complicated than I thought. And then the more you know, it's like, yeah, the less you realize you actually know.
I hadn't heard
Yeah.
that phrase, but I know exactly what you're talking about. Like, now a lot of we've got the data from this first round, and some of my science buddies are trying to figure out how. How is that happening? Why is that happening?
Hmm.
Or more the why. Like, why is that happening? Why is so much carbon staying in the soil and it's not across the fence? And for me, I'm like, that'd be great to know why, but I just know it's happening. Like, that's almost enough for me. Like, it's
Right.
happening. We can measure it. Let's keep telling farmers, because so many farmers don't know that soil health is an option. And it's not a blame or shame thing whatsoever. It's just not talked about. It's like we in our film, when one of our farmers spends a morning with Alan, he's like, "Thank you. I didn't know any of this. It makes
Mm.
perfect sense. No one's ever taken the time to tell me this stuff." About how hot the soil gets if there's not a plant on it. It makes sense when you hear it, but you just don't it's just not in your consciousness unless you hear it, right? And certainly for me, who I'm not a farmer, I had to learn all this stuff over and over, like from scratch, right? So just knowing it's happening, soil health, farmers, to my knowledge, to where I'm sitting right now, it's like I just want every farmer to know that this is an option. Whether they choose to go down the road is up to them. But I sure would love it if we could have incentives for people going down that road. Like, I was just talking to some folks who were looking at the CRP program, was it the Conservation Reserve Program, where we're paying farmers to not farm, so then the soil gets a little covered by some grasses and weeds, and it stops eroding, right? But you can't graze that.
Mhm.
And if you could graze CRP land, then I think that would be a pretty amazing use of land, right? And so we were talking about, well, they were saying it's $1.8 billion a year being paid out to farmers to not farm their land. But if we could then pay that money to a farmer to graze that land in a method that is beneficial, then that's the kind of incentive spending the money anyway. Why don't we spend it for something that's going to generate positive outcomes for not only the farmer but that entire watershed? And
Yep.
that's where it gets exciting when you think about watersheds, right?
Yeah.
What happened in Texas with those incredibly bad floods,
Mm.
those floods happened.
Mhm.
And that's land use management. There's a great podcast with a guy who used to work at the EPA. His name's Brian Hummel. Has he come across your
Mm.
world? Okay, so you guys need to meet. And it's the Regenerate folks. It's their podcast. I can't remember the name of the podcast, but if you look up Brian Hummel, Hummell, his podcast was just a couple weeks ago, and he really talks about Texas. He's from that part of Texas. He
Mm.
stayed at that camp that got washed away when he was a kid. So he's feeling this on a deep, deep level personally, but he also understands that land use is a big cause of that kind of flash flooding, and that we know how to manage land better. It's like there's so much positive that can come out of managing land well,
Yep.
and it'll help so many people that don't even know about it, but the farmers need to know about it. That's why we made Roots So Deep. That's why we have it up on our website. That's why I'm doing a podcast myself. It's called The Peter Byck Show. We're 4 episodes in, and people are on it. And of
Yep.
course, interviewing the same brilliant people. Why not?
No.
Way ahead of us.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. We have not reached the upper limit of the agriculturalists and their ability to consume content. So
Right.
I welcome all content creators. Yeah, that the Texas thing again. It's also an illustration, and I'm not trying to score points or anything like that, but it just is an illustration. And Texas is a big state. Caveat, caveat, caveat. Okay, but yeah, in within a few months, you've got dust storms so bad that they cause accidents on the interstate, and rainstorms so bad that and flooding runoff so bad that it causes tragic, catastrophic flooding. You know what I mean?
In the same place.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And so those extreme weather events, you can debate why they're happening. Doesn't really matter in one way, matters to me, but that's okay. They're happening. And regenerative agriculture mitigates both ends of that spectrum. And it makes the farm land more resilient. And we have a very dangerous situation in our country where, our food production
Yeah.
is not guaranteed.
Right. Well, that's
And
David Montgomery, right? Dirt,
yeah,
the erosion of civilization,
yeah.
and that is what happens. That's what happens in civilizations to this point in recorded history, is they overfarm their land to the point that they can't sustain life and they have to move on. And the problem among all the problems with that is oftentimes that ends in fairly bloody revolutions that we don't want either, right?
No.
Obviously.
Doesn't
Right.
But we know it can happen. And humans are kind of thick-headed and like to repeat themselves over the eons. But a country that can produce its own food has national security. Country that's properly using its water has water security, right? National security, water security. So when we think of soil health, I think of it as a big tent, and there's many entrances into that tent. Like I said, national
Sure.
security, water security, stewardship, faith, where I'm sure is part of the reason
Oh, yeah.
you're in that tent. Nutrient density, health, right? Health of the land. Folks who are very concerned about wildlife and birds and hunters. Hunters and bird watchers both have the same need, which is healthy landscape. So we're all coming in. I come in through climate change. We're all coming into this tent for our own reasons. The amazing thing is that inside it's the same exact solution. It's not like, oh, you have to tailor it this way for that, or you have to tailor it this way for that. No, it's the same solution for everyone. And that is showing us because we have a really strong social media team. And I'm telling you, we're getting comments and kudos and support from across this very diverse American political spectrum. It's soil health absolutely is something that everyone understands. Like people trust nature. It's there. We
Yeah.
have a solution to bring people together. It's not like, I wonder what it would be. We have it and we see it. I'm sure you see it.
Oh, yeah.
And
Well, I mean, yeah, a couple of things there, right? So, Johannes Kepler said science is the process of thinking God's thoughts after him. And so we're seeing God's fingerprints in the soil with all of these underground microbes and like the job that they do. Like literally plants are stripping the outside of these microbes off and eating them for nutrients and energy. And I mean, just incredible design, right? That we can down under there. And so I think that's one of the things that just always resonates with me, that, oh yeah, we're seeing the goodness of this and how good it can be. And the other thing is, like, I've talked to so many of these people, the best minds in this industry, and all of them agree we're just scratching the surface of how good this can get. Right? Like we have not seen the upper limit of how good regenerative agriculture can make land, and you go back to the Lewis and Clark talking about riding across the prairies, tying the grass in knots above their saddle horns, because that's what it was like. Well, yeah, that's what it can be. It can be that again. It might take a little longer. I don't know if it'll take longer to make it what it was at one time than it took to degenerate it. Even if it does, we're really not that far removed from that. Like, so we can get back there.
yeah, and to me, it's like, I'm sure you have your days of doubt. I have my days of doubt, days that are hard, but I can only see working on this now. Now that I know the power of soil health regeneration, I know the power of what AMP grazing can do. I know the power of regenerative agriculture. I have to work on it. I have to. I don't have a choice. And having that purpose, having that goal, having the whole amount of people that we're working together towards this thing, it's definitely powerful, but doesn't mean that we don't have hard days. It
Right.
doesn't mean that at all. There's some days that are just brutal,
Yep.
right?
Absolutely. No doubt.
It doesn't make me want to go backwards. It doesn't make me want
Right.
to think of a different career.
Yep, for sure. Same answer I gave when you said, "Did you want to quit in the drought?" No, I didn't. I was just maybe a little impatient, waiting to see the improvement, but I
Bet.
never
Oh
wanted
my
to quit.
gosh. Farming is so slow. I mean,
Yeah.
the time frames and the opportunities. And then one day someone said, "Hey, listen, most farmers probably, if they're in a family situation, they get their land when they're 40, 45, sometimes much later. But
Right.
you get that land when you're 40, you live to your 80, you got what, 40 shots? You got
Yeah.
like 40 shots at your whole thing. It's an amazing thing to think about.
So with all that background to your own kind of journey into this, what was from this specific project, what was the most surprising to you? And I told you earlier that I don't do good with that question, but I decided to ask it anyway.
No, it's fine. I kind of mentioned it. It was the birds surprised me the most. Two things. The fact that the conventional farmer was already curious, but just really too polite to ask about what was happening across the fence. I did not anticipate that. I was told it was the opposite of that. And then the power of the birds, and then in the Southeast US, the power of a bird, the bobwhite quail, like how powerful that bird is and how beloved it is and how like rare it is. except for if you start moving your cows in a regenerative fashion, and they just show up.
Yeah.
Because they're making a decision and they're flying in. They're just going, where do I
Yep.
want to land? And of course, just growing your forage high enough to have them safe to have their families in June or whatever it is pretty cool, right? And then that taken to the prairies. I think my buddy Russ Conser heard this from the Audubon Society, that the meadowlark is the canary of the prairie.
Hmm.
Right? So that if you have meadowlark in your pasture or your prairie, you know it's healthy, and if you don't, then you should be
Hmm.
worried. And yeah, birds are so powerful, and then they just mean something. They mean so much to so many people. And we've got some big time birders on our science team, so I'm learning from them all the time. But I mean, there's a statistic that's just like it's a $40 billion a year business. That's much bigger than Hollywood.
Right. Well, and that was the guy that said that in the documentary points out, and he's sitting in NASCAR country. He's like, that's more than NASCAR.
Yeah. Well, we drove by Talladega all the time going around our farms.
Sean Freeland, who I mentioned twice now, this is third time. First time he's been mentioned on a podcast, probably. This is third time I mentioned him in this podcast. You know, he in just east of Rapid City, South Dakota, that he heard a Bob White at his place the other day. Had a recording of it, actually. Played it for guys from Indiana. Said, what is that? And they said, that's a Bob White. And he's like, yeah, I grew up hearing them in my grandma's farm in Missouri. And now I'm hearing them here, and the discussion among everybody there was like, maybe what he was saying was to the other Bob Whites, this is too far north, go back. It's cold here, go back. But I mean, that's what you start to see in these places that are so well managed is, you know, things that shouldn't be there. They're there. Grass species that shouldn't be there. They're there. Animal species that shouldn't be there. They're there.
Or just people haven't seen them for 80 years.
Right.
Now they're expressing themselves again.
Well, and we don't know what's been there. Right.
You know, there's like reports from the 20s and 30s from a
Right.
lot of different areas. And they're like, here's all the species we see. And then not for 80 years, these people start doing amp grazing. And all of a sudden these grasses are coming up. And they're like, wow, we haven't seen this in 80 years. You hear that story over and over and over again.
Yeah.
It's great to be that consistent. Like I've heard it in New Mexico, I've heard it in Mississippi, you know, very, very different ecosystems, right? Like
Yeah. As different as it gets.
Exactly.
So kind of as we point toward wrapping up here, how should people listening talk to their neighbors? Regenerative listeners, we're guessing. But what are some of the things that you would say, hey, if you want to talk to your neighbors? Because I think people think that Canada is so nice, and no offense to the Canadians listening, but people think that Canada from the coasts, people on the coasts think that Canada is so nice because they've never spent any time in flyover country. We're all that nice too. We like, and we're so nice that we don't want to ask our neighbor or offend our neighbor, or even if we're curious about, hey, I can see the difference in your grass, but I don't want to meddle in your business. You know, that's kind of what I'm alluding to, is what you were just saying there. So
a couple pieces on Canada. Just go to a hockey game, and then try walking around in Vancouver in a parking garage, and you see a different side. I've never seen people drive as fast as in a parking garage except in Vancouver. So just to say that, and I love Canada, but they do love to fight on that hockey on that. What I've learned is respectful listening is essential. I love when I meet someone who's different and I can ask them questions just to find out what they're made of. And I can do that in a respectful way because my parents taught me how to do that. My grandmother taught me how to do that. But my dad specifically, I'll give you this one story. We were on our way to Florida. I lived in Louisville, Kentucky, raised there. We're going down to spring break. And we were filling up the gas before we hit the road. And the guy who was filling up the gas, because this was back in the 70s when you didn't have to fill up your own gas, he had leg braces on. And my dad asked him, he's like, what happened? And he did it in a very respectful, straight up way. And the guy told us. Whereas most people would feel like you can't ask that question because you know, you just don't do that. And then remembering that, I was at a party in Los Angeles where I went to film school and lived for a long time. And this woman was burned head to toe and had to touch a button to speak. And I remembered my dad's thing. I just said, what happened? And I said it with empathy, curiosity. And she thanked me for asking her because she knows everyone's wondering. She doesn't want to be out there talking about it. Like, hey, guess what happened to me? But she really wants to talk about it. So I actually, by asking her that question, I was doing her a service. And it was a crazy story. It was a Bic lighter that had been leaking, and she had a spark in her blanket, and she woke up in a ball of flames. So it was a horrible story, but she wanted to talk about it. So that taught me it's okay to ask anything of anyone as long as you're coming from a place of respect, right? So if a conventional farmer is looking across the fence at their neighbor and they're seeing something different, genuinely wanting to find out, will be well heard by their neighbor. I can guarantee you every adaptive farmer I've ever met cannot wait to talk about it. They're excited, they're blown away, they want to share it with people, but they don't want to tell other folks what to do.
Right.
So I've discovered in this project there's a politeness on both sides. Conventional farmers like, I don't want to get in their business, even if they're friends, right? I don't want to get in their business. The adaptive farmers like, man, I would love to tell these folks this. I know they'd love it, but I can't tell them what to do. And so there's this sort of impasse, right? So how does the adaptive farmer broach the subject with a conventional farmer? Like in my film, they had me, a filmmaker, a couple cameras, me and Chris, and so we kind of stirred it up a little bit artificially, right? And then they found out, oh wow, this is great, right? And one of my favorite moments in the movie is when Wallace Ferguson and Cooper Hurst are talking about the grazing, and Katie Hurst, Cooper's wife, says, here you all have known each other for 25 years and you talk about everything. You talk about pigs, you talk about deer, and you don't talk about grass. Shame on you. And I don't know how it is in South Dakota, but when a Southern woman says shame on you, men stop what they're doing. It's like it's a big deal. And I just love that moment in the movie. It's so good. So it's like, maybe the adaptive farmer just says, do you ever wonder what I'm doing over here? Like, do you think I'm crazy? And to like try to bring it up in a way where you're kind of owning. I found in my own life that when I ask somebody for help, unless they're like crazy weird, they're like, listen, how can I help you? You know what I mean? And so that idea of, hey, I need some help, that could be a way to start the conversation. Like, I need some help. I want to talk to you about this, but I don't know if you want me to. That might be it. Like, I'm learning some cool stuff here. I know I'm first generation, and I know you got 5 generations behind you, and I am not trying to tell you what to do, but I'm learning some stuff that I would love to share with you just to get your opinion on it. That might be a way to break that up. It's like, as long as I own it when I talk to people about stuff and I don't point, as soon as I point, I don't get very far. But respectful listening, respectfully asking for help, I think those are powerful tools. And it doesn't put someone on the defensive, it opens them up too. That would be my suggestion, and I would love to know if it works.
Certainly. Yeah. And as I said, documentaries, so well done. Very much appreciate it.
Yeah.
Everything about it. Good storytelling, animation, all that. But I mean, you capture some heavy moments in there, and appreciate the way you did that as well. So I encourage people to go check that out. We'll have a link in the show notes page for today where they can do that. But my last question is what from this project will inform and maybe change the way you approach the next project?
We had assumptions as a science team, and we had sort of 2 different groups. We had the group that was trying to get Shell to pay for everything, and we got them to pay for something, and it was sort of half Shell employees, half external. That was called Project Metalark. And then we had the big science team. We sort of had 2 teams. There was overlap. But what I learned in this process of these years of working with these brilliant people is that our ideas and what we see and what we want to see are of value, and that we've given this a lot of thought. How do we scale this up? How do we get a lot of farmers involved in something that will hopefully be really, really valuable for them, right? Now, I've had farmers in my work thank us for being part of it because they saw something new, they tried it, and they're grateful. And that, to me, that's the whole goal, right? We need that 100,000 times. Why? Because our food is not secure. Our soils are in bad shape. Our water cycling's in bad shape. Our watersheds need to be fixed. Our aquifers are drying up. That's why. And we need to take care of this, and we know how. And so now, how that's all informing is we now understand we've had good instincts, we've had persistence, we've had good follow through. The data that we've collected is powerful. Okay, so that sort of gives us a foundation of confidence. So now, how do we get like for-profit entities to come on board to this? How do we affect companies in a way that's beneficial to them as well, right? Like this is a win-win-win no matter what you touch, it's a win. And so now all this work is showing us that we have good ideas. We are competent. What can we build? And that's where we're at right now. What can we build to help this along?
You mentioned work in North and South Dakota. Is that a project ongoing?
Most of the same research, same researchers that we did in the Southeast that we did in Roots So Deep. It's just that same research in the Dakotas, and that's in process right now. Because we just want to see totally different ecosystems,
Right.
what's happening.
Yep. Yeah, that'll be really interesting to see how that differs. Will that become a documentary in the future, or do you know?
No, I know it won't. This documentary in the Southeast was big.
Right.
Big to handle, a heck of a lot of work. And so now we're making a lot of short films again, a lot of short pieces for our social media. We're making our first Carbon Cowboys short film right now. It's the 11th, the first one since 2018. And the working title is Camp Amp, so stay tuned. I'm not even filming up in the Northern Great Plains at this point. Now maybe we'll come out and do some interviews with folks and do some social media stuff with the farmers, the ranchers, but at this point that will definitely not be what we did in the Southeast. I was filming the whole time in the Southeast. We haven't been filming at all in the Dakotas. Just because I was still, when we set up the Dakotas, I was still working on the Southeast project, the Roots So Deep project, and then it takes a lot of work to market it. We've been on the road for years now, and I've been all over the world, and it takes a lot of time and money and energy, which I think is all well spent. The time, the money, and the energy. It's just I couldn't then do that as well.
Sure. Yeah. No, totally makes sense. But yeah, look forward to that. Just some of the information that comes out of that, because I wonder if it'll be the same.
Yeah.
I wonder.
Science is, right?
Right. I was surprised, honestly, that the conventional grazing was as much of a sink as it was, and I wonder if in a brittle environment if that'll be the same.
Yeah.
Honestly.
And we'll find out, and it's the same scientists and the same labs, so we try to do everything as apples to apples as possible. But science is messy, and big research is messy, so you get what you get, right?
Yeah, for sure. Very good. Peter, thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Clay. I really appreciate it.
Very good stuff there with Peter. Really appreciate his perspective and the way he thinks about these things and the process that he's gone through to learn and then to document. As I started out by asking, this is a tough nut to crack. How are we going to take a systems approach to a documentary? And so I think he's done a good job of that. Would encourage you to go take a look. It's worth the watch. It's an entertaining and informative series of episodes that they put together for their documentary. There'll be links in the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/456, where you can go and find out how to check that out. The goal next on the Working Cows podcast is to feature an episode with Dr. Alan Williams on epigenetics, looking at kind of how they affect the bottom line, what their impact is on our businesses. And so look forward to sharing that with you real soon on another episode of the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.